Republicans and Democrats are clashing over taxes and Medicaid. Which issue will dominate next year? Plus, book bans are back in the spotlight. How Republican state board members are challenging what kids are reading in schools. And it's an issue that could go to the Supreme Court. What will happen in the legal battle over gender markers? You're taking a look inside Kansas politics. Welcome in. I'm Rebecca Chung. We're breaking down top political issues in Kansas. And joining me today is Rachel Mepro with the Kansas Reflector and political science professor Michael Smith. Rachel, Michael, let's start with Medicaid expansion. The governor is making another push for that next year, now launching a statewide tour. Here's what she had to say when asked about whether it will move forward this year.
I know that there are a bipartisan group of legislators there who, if given the opportunity to vote for Medicaid expansion, I'm absolutely certain it would pass.
Now, the question is this just another attempt that will fail in the Republican-controlled legislature? Is it a waste of taxpayer dollars, like Republican leaders are saying? Rachel, let's start with you.
Right, so as we heard today from a tax meeting, basically Republicans are saying no matter what, they're not going to go for Medicaid expansion. You know, and we have two top leaders, legislature, Speaker of the House, you know, Dan Hawkins and then also Ty Masterson, both of whom have said that Medicaid expansion will be that red line for them. They are not going to cross that no matter what.
And Michael, what are your thoughts on this? Will this tour drum up support or will it fall apart come next year?
It could actually do both, believe it or not. According to the Kansas Speaks survey done out of the Docking Institute at Fort Hays State, most Kansans do support Medicaid expansion and have for the last several years, and those results are pretty consistent. So it may very well bring up support or reactivate support among the public. The legislature is not having it. The legislative Republicans have never been particularly interested. The number of moderate Republicans in the legislature has dwindled. There are just a few left. And so I don't see how it passes. So believe it or not, it could simultaneously drum up support and not go anywhere both at the same time.
So it's something that is possibly in vain, this attempt.
Well, I think it could be political positioning, for one thing. We've got an election year coming up next year, and this will be staking out the issues. Democrats in a red state like Kansas really want to stake out bread and butter issues: health care, child care, jobs, pay. They want to stay away from this culture war stuff that we're going to be talking about later, like with library books and such. And so this will stake out a sort of Laura Kelly Democratic Party. Don't worry about that culture war stuff. We're talking about your bread and butter. And the Republicans, I think, are going to dig in.
And one of those issues they're also focusing on next year, taxes. With all this money the state has, Republicans and Democrats are pushing for tax reform. Republicans stopped in Topeka on their Prosperity Express tour. I spoke with Speaker Hawkins earlier this year, who says they'll be bringing up their single rate income tax, or a flat tax as some call it. And they're doing this again next year. Here's what they had to say at the latest rally.
You know, we've got to come up with a supermajority. We've got to come up with 84 and 27. And we are going to work really hard to do that. And I think part of that is making sure we have those folks that may have some questions at the table.
Now, I spoke with the governor earlier this year as well, and she's saying flat out no to the flat tax. Will Republicans and Democrats reach a compromise on a tax package, do you think? Rachel?
So let's start with the flat tax principle. Basically, last year's was, I think, 5.15%, and that would have primarily benefited the top, I think, 20% of Kansans. So it was unpopular with Democrats who said, again, this would give like most Kansans no tax breaks at all or very little tax reform at all. And then it got down so close to the wire last time. I think it was one vote short of, overriding Governor Kelly's veto of that. So we came very close to having that last year. If that one vote switches either sides, we're going to see some trouble this year in terms of passing it or not passing it. It will come down to one person, essentially.
And Michael, what say you? Will taxpayers see any relief next year?
Yes, I think they will. I don't think any proposals you're seeing now are going to pass as is. That's not how legislation works. But Medicaid expansion is more of a yes or no. Are you in or are you out? Whereas with tax legislation, there's a lot of room for compromise, wiggle room, phasing things in, I'll trade this for this, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think it is likely. My concern is that the state has a lot of one-time money, and if they go and spend that and they run out, then the state may have cut taxes so much they can't afford basic government services.
Thank you both. Coming up, Republicans are raising concerns with books in Kansas schools. With the legislature and state board leaning red, could a push for book bans come to Kansas? We'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
Looking for new floors? Our prices will knock your socks off. The Floor Project.
Where our special buys mean savings of 55% for you. Carpet, vinyl plank, hardwood, porcelain, direct manufacturer discounts, free financing, buying power. It all adds up to a better deal. In-stock specials means the best flooring prices in town guaranteed.
Save money, no worries. That's what the Floor Project is all about.
Mental health is about emotional health and brain health.
Healthy children and families.
And a healthy Kansas.
Go to acmhck.org to find your local community mental health center.
Doughboys Pizzeria, a family restaurant in North Topeka, serving fresh pizza with our signature sauce, award-winning wings, awesome appetizers, and desserts, with outdoor dining and entertainment. Call or order online at doughboys.pizza.
Vanderbilt's is the place to save on boots, jeans, and more during our fall savings event. New style available in our comfortable Ariat Spitfire. Our price, $129.99. Save $20 on these durable Double H work boots, $134.99. Check out these new Twisted X boots made specifically for Vanderbilt's with a custom purple top, $169.99. Unbelievable savings on Thorogood neoprene boots. Closeout price, $59.99.
Work Boot Center, Vanderbilt.
Join us for Family Service and Guidance Center's Meals for Mental Health fundraiser at Texas Roadhouse all through October. Enjoy a meal and help kids and families living with anxiety, depression, substance use, and other challenges. Get your tickets today.
Next Live with Kelly and Mark. We kick off Live's Let's Dance Week.
Did my entire back of my dress rip open?
Nope,
okay,
nope, just a little bit.
Monday morning at 11 on 27 KSNT.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. I'm Rebecca Chung, continuing our conversation with State House reporter Rachel Mepro and political science professor Michael Smith. Rachel, Michael, at a state board meeting this month, newly elected Republican board members challenged what kids are learning in Kansas schools. Board member Daniel Zeck raised concerns over the language used in one book. It's called The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. Quoting from the book, he says one line states, "I admit that I masturbate." He questioned why smut, as he calls it, is allowed in Kansas schools. Rachel, you were monitoring this meeting when Zeck made these comments. What was the reaction like from the rest of the board? Also, how did this come up?
Right, great question. So there's a couple of different elements to this. Let's begin with the, as you say, the reaction to this. I think people kind of wanted to move on because this is really not within the purview of the State Board of Education. Typically, it's left to local school boards and school libraries to control the sort of material that's in their libraries. So there's policies in place that have been in place for about 20 years. Usually they're set up by the Kansas Association of School Boards, and they kind of set out the guidelines to what books should be in there. And if you want to remove a book, what policies you should do. And usually it starts at the school level and then moves up. So typically if you're a parent and you have a problem with the book, you bring it to the teacher or the librarian and then move up if it's not addressed. So in a way, it seems like it was some members and some people I've heard say this is sort of grandstanding, right? Because this is, again, not something within his control. It's not something he has power over. And then it kind of was just like a shock value platform derailing a meeting that would otherwise be addressing other things.
And Michael, now that the board has shifted further right since the last election, how could this change the kind of conversations we're seeing surrounding this issue moving forward? So it's also worth mentioning that we have seen attempts in the legislature to challenge what kids are learning in schools, like the Parents' Bill of Rights. How does that factor in?
It factors in a very big way. Essentially what we're doing, again, here we go again, is we're taking things like the Kansas School Board, just like a few years ago we took the Kansas Secretary of State's office and other things that traditionally have been kind of nonpartisan. I mean, yeah, they were partisan, people were elected on a partisan ticket, but a lot of the decisions they made were not always made with a partisan split in how people were voting. It was more of a nonpartisan kind of a work toward the middle, teach toward the middle kind of a thing. And we're bringing the culture war into it. So there are a million issues with Kansas education, right? We've got test scores, we've got funding, we've got disparities, we still haven't made up for everything we lost during the COVID pandemic, which in some ways is still going on too. And that's another issue. What if the pandemic gets worse, and what kind of policies and procedures will we have? No, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a couple of library books. And so I understand why they're controversial, but we really have to stop and ask ourselves about priorities here. We're talking about more than half of the taxpayer dollars of the people of Kansas go to K through 12 education. Is this something that should be our top priority?
And we've also seen this brought up during local board meetings for schools, and even here in Topeka more recently, a county commission meeting where one person challenged what public library boards were offering in collections. Let's take a listen.
Part 1, boy on boy sex. Perhaps the most important skill you'll master is the hand job. The good news is you can practice on yourself. It's nothing but filth. I beg your pardon, you wish to?
Yeah. Are these the books that are available in our library?
Yes, sir. Bought and paid for.
I think the book she holds up is Lawn Boy, and she's also, going back and forth with the county commissioner. So the question is, should these books be offered in public libraries where kids may be able to access them? How do the rules differ from what's allowed in schools, and who gets to decide what's on these shelves?
Well, generally speaking, it is up to the schools and the libraries, as Rachel already pointed out. That's been the tradition that librarians are trained, they have this background in this, they get book lists and so on and so forth. Incidentally, there are 2 children's books called Lawn Boy, and they are completely different, so just so your viewers know. But generally we trust the teachers and we trust the librarians. There is a process for parents who have concerns to bring that up and to say, hey, my kiddo brought home a book and I'm not really comfortable with it, and there are ways that the schools can respond. In some of these cases of what appears to be spontaneous outrage, that's actually not what's happening. It may happen in some cases, but oftentimes what happens is that there are conservative groups that push out lists of books, and their members will actually go into schools. They may not even have children in those public schools, and look through the library catalog to see if they have those books, and then say, I am outraged. So not all of this is true grassroots pressure. Some of it is what we call astroturf pressure.
Rachel, anything to add there? I know when we were discussing the Parents' Bill of Rights, this has to do with public libraries, what's offered there. But going back to the argument about what's offered to kids in schools, Parents' Bill of Rights, that was the legislature attempting to assert control over local school boards. Could we see some conflict if something like this was raised?
I mean, I think we could, right? Because there's a common narrative now that we can't trust what's in our school libraries, what's in our schools. And it's kind of pushed out there as a sort of fear tactic, I would even say, to say, hey, you need to be cautious at every moment. So we have 2 factors here, parental rights, right? And then also school choice. And the 2 kind of tie together, because they're saying right now that you parents need to be the one authority right here, because we can no longer trust teachers and librarians because of this, like, quote unquote smut that we're using in our libraries, right? So if you can't trust the parents, then you need school choice. You need to put your kids in a safely monitored environment, such as a private school, because these public schools, they've got smut in the libraries. And then we are seeing a lot with the local school board elections coming up in November. We're seeing a lot more of this whole like parental rights rhetoric, a lot of school choice rhetoric. And again, this idea that you can no longer trust teachers and librarians to be safe with the material in the schools.
And Michael, I know there's a book rule that you wanted to talk about. It was implemented in Missouri this year. The rule requires a new policy that bans libraries from buying materials deemed obscene and from having certain displays and events in children's areas. Could something similar be considered in Kansas? Should the legislature have that kind of authority over what public library boards include in their libraries?
They could, yes. Let me give you a little background on this since I study Missouri politics as well. I apologize to the Jayhawk fans out there, but we'll go inside Missouri politics for just a sec. Secretary of State, Missouri Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft is running for governor. And this may or may not be related, but he promulgated a rule, which is that libraries in the state have to develop their own policies to keep books deemed inappropriate for young children away from children's areas. And on the one hand, he argues that he's giving the libraries the freedom to implement the policy their way, but the pushback is librarians are saying they're afraid if he doesn't like their policy, or if the legislature doesn't, they could get punished with a loss of state funding. Incidentally, it's the rural libraries, this is Kansas too, most dependent on state funding. The urban libraries tend to get most of their money from local property taxes. So it's the rural libraries that are really on the line here, because they need that state money. So that's that controversy, but I have another issue here, and that is, and we see this with all kinds of policies. You say, well, all you've got to do is require these kiddos to get a parent's permission to get a library card. And in healthy, functioning families, I don't care if it's traditional, non-traditional, single parent, married parents, if it's a healthy, functioning family, we all took permission slips home to our parents as kids, and they signed them, and then we went on the field trip or whatever, and it's no issue, and it's not going to be an issue with the library. But ask anyone in human services, ask any teacher, what do they do on their lunch break? Do they eat lunch? No, they do not. Maybe 5 minutes, they wolf it down. Then they have to get on the phone with a parent, or they have to hotline another kid. There are a lot of families in Kansas, Missouri, and other states that are not functioning the way they should. And those kids are the ones that most need to have access to the library, because that's where they can escape, either into the library or into a book. And their parents are not functioning well enough to get it together and get that permission slip signed. And that's why I oppose these regulations.
Michael, Rachel, thank you. Up next, Kansas says it won't be changing gender markers on birth certificates. Plus, the battle over gender markers on driver's licenses continues. The ACLU is now stepping in. How will this play out in court? We'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
Car wrecks don't just happen from 9 to 5. If you're in a wreck, we're available 24/7.
Don't wait until tomorrow to get the help you need now. In a wreck, need a check?
Patterson Legal is the way to go. Call 431-0000.
At 2 Men and a Truck, we'll treat you and your belongings like we'd treat our own grandmas.
Here we go!
Hello there. Welcome. Whether we're moving you across town or even across the country.
It is extremely important to have carbon monoxide detectors in your home.
Now is the time to call DeBackers for a complete tune and clean of your furnace and proper placement of carbon monoxide detectors, keeping your family safe for over 60 years. DeBackers Heating and Cooling.
At Cox Mobile, we know other mobile companies like you to stay put with one type of plan. But we know life can take you anywhere, which is why you get the freedom to choose a data plan that actually fits you and the ease of changing it up anytime. Choose between pay-as-you-gig or gig unlimited, all while running on the network with unbeatable 5G reliability. Flexibility feels good. Cox Mobile, we're different because you're different.
September is Hunger Action Month, and I'm doing my part to help the community by volunteering at our local food pantry. Donations, whether they're food, funds, or even just your time, help the millions of children facing hunger in the U.S. When people are fed, futures are nourished. This Hunger Action Month, join Feeding America. Consider volunteering, donating, or advocating so everyone can be a part of the movement to end hunger.
Join the movement at feedingamerica.org/Hunger Action Month.
Car wrecks don't just happen from 9 to 5. If you're in a wreck, we're available 24/7.
Don't wait until tomorrow to get the help you need now. In a wreck, need a check?
Patterson Legal is the way to go. Call 431-0000.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. I'm Rebecca Chung. We're shifting now to the legal battle over gender markers. Rachel, Michael, one dispute down now with the birth certificate issue. The state health department is no longer allowing gender marker changes there. And the judge says the state's new law, SB 180, clearly states, which it does, that this document should reflect either male or female at birth based on the law. Rachel, what the judge didn't decide is whether this law is constitutional. What factors into that conversation, do you think?
I am so glad you asked, because this has got a really interesting history. So basically in 2019, there was a consent judgment that basically said that Kansas has to legally allow transgender people and anyone who wants it to change their birth records to the marker they feel comfortable with. So that was 2019, right? They were saying this is a constitutionally protected right. And now a couple years later, that's switched over, is no longer settled. So again, there is a really big clash between state and national on this.
And this decision came down as a shock, I'm sure, to one side, because they argue that this is a constitutionally protected right, mainly looking at the right to privacy in some cases, some opponents of this law say. So this may come up during the legal battle over gender markers on driver's licenses coming up next year in January. Kobach is suing the Division of Motor Vehicles. The right to privacy isn't explicitly stated in the Constitution, though. So could this create an obstacle during court discussions about this law? Michael, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it could create an obstacle. The right to privacy and the federal law comes from cases in the 1960s and 70s, where it essentially was ruled that it is implied by other rights. We have a right against unlawful search and seizure. We have a right to freedom of assembly. We have a right to free speech. And a number of different rights, including the Ninth Amendment, which protects the rights not explicitly protected by the other amendments, those imply, the Supreme Court called it penumbras, those imply a right to privacy. Well, the Roe v. Wade decision was based on that. It came from an earlier case, and of course that was overturned with the Dobbs decision. And so now the question is, will the U.S. Supreme Court overturn the right to privacy itself, which came from an earlier case about birth control called Griswold v. Connecticut? If they did, it could have a ripple effect that could affect a lot of laws, or potential laws, including this one.
All right, we'll be right back. You're watching Inside Kansas Politics.
Growing the market for Kansas-made E15 is a win-win for Kansans. What's E15? It's fuel with 15% ethanol compared to the usual 10% in regular unleaded. E15 is more affordable, has better performance, and runs cleaner than regular unleaded, meaning Kansas drivers can go further for less. From helping Kansas farm families by stabilizing grain prices, helping Kansas become more energy independent, and adding more than 4,000 jobs in Kansas, more of our money stays right here at home because of ethanol. Visit fueledbykansas.com to find a station near you.
Hi, we're Rick and Penny Cluse with God's Storehouse. This past year, with your continued support, over 1,300 individuals were able to shop for clothing at no charge. We helped furnish over 200 homes and made gently used items available at an affordable cost to all.
So we want to thank you. Because of your generosity, we employ over 70 with livable wages and benefits.
We also offer free pickup services for your gently used furniture and larger items. We're excited as we look forward to future plans of expansion and serving our community.
The story of Grace Med has always been told through its people, both those who serve and those who it is our honor to serve. We meet at the intersection of compassion and vulnerability, bringing health where there was illness and hope where there was despair. Our patients come to us bearing the weight of living in the margins, and we share the love of Jesus Christ with them by providing compassionate quality health care for all their physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. Because health restored is always hope renewed. Find hope today by scheduling an appointment with Grace Med.
Devon James wins.
After a car accident, life gets tough.
At Devon James, we fight for what really matters.
You have your everyday bills and now the accident bills.
You have to get better while you're still trying to get by.
And who knows what's down the road? So call us at Devon James. We'll fight for everything you deserve.
And you don't pay us anything until we win your case.
That's our no-fee guarantee.
Devon James wins. Call 888-8888.
Welcome back to Inside Kansas Politics. I'm Rebecca Chung. We're continuing our conversation on gender markers. Rachel, Michael, one concern that's also raised about this new law, SB 180, is whether it violates First Amendment rights. Some opponents argue that ID documents also center on saying and defining who people are. The question is, who gets to decide that? Is it the government, the doctor, or do individuals get to exercise autonomy over their identity. Rachel, what do you think about that?
So, I mean, the argument's already been made because right now, currently, we're seeing a temporary block, right? No one can change their gender markers right now for that. If you already have changed your marker, I think it's still considered valid. But if you lose that one or try and renew it, you have to switch back to the markers assigned to you at birth. So, I mean, again, the transgender Kansans I've talked to have already said their individual rights have been stripped by this block alone, no matter what's decided later on.
And Michael, what are your thoughts? Is there grounds to say that this is something that's afforded to people, autonomy over their identity when it comes to state records?
Well, you know, I gave blood today. I want to put a plug in for blood donations. And when we have interactions with the medical establishment, it does remind us that there are times when the sex assigned at birth is medically relevant information. And there needs to be some type of way of keeping track of that so that people get good health care. But is a driver's license really an appropriate document to use for medical documentation? I think we could argue that it is not. And so there's a role, certainly, for the sex assigned at birth. Your doctor needs to know that, but I don't know that everybody looking at your driver's license does. In terms of First Amendment challenges, there's also the 10th Amendment, reserve powers to the states. And so it's going to become interesting, especially with the Supreme Court of the U.S. being so conservative, if they're going to take that up or they're going to say, let the states decide. And then what you'll have is that in some states you can change it on your driver's license, and in other states you can't. And then what happens if somebody moves from one state to another and gets a new driver's license?
Thank you both. We also asked State Attorney General Chris Kobach this question. Here's a quick clip of what he had to say. Do individuals get to exercise autonomy over their own identity? What do you say to those who believe in this case that right lies with the individual?
That's not them speaking on the driver's license. That's the state saying, if you want to be authorized to drive a car, here's the license you have to carry, and this is the information we, the state, choose to put on that license.
We'll have the full interview with Attorney General Kobach on the legal battle over gender markers coming up on our next episode. But for now, that was your look inside Kansas politics. If you want to keep up to date on all things Kansas politics, then follow us on social media. Follow us on Twitter at InKansasPolitics and on Facebook. Just search Inside Kansas Politics. We'll also post the full video on YouTube. Just search KSNT News and check ksnt.com/inside-kansas-politics for past episodes. If you have a story you want Kansas state legislators to hear or topics you think we should cover, let us know. You can email us at ikp@ksnt.com. We'll see you here same time, same place.